Welcome to the Rich with Purpose podcast, the finance podcast that's about more than just money. I'm your host, Thabojan Rasiah, financial advisor to hundreds of successful clients over the years. In each episode of this show, I speak with other experts in the complex world of money and finance, and together we discuss how you can ensure you make smart decisions with your money. Even more importantly, how to connect those decisions with your values and your purpose in order to achieve everything that is most important to you. Please note that everything we discuss is not personal advice, but general in nature. For the full disclaimer, please visit our website, richwithpurpose.com.au, where you can also register your details to get access to all our free resources. And please hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. In episode 15, I speak to Catherine Asquith. Catherine is an art advisor, specialising in buying and selling art, valuations, and art collection development and management. What sets Catherine apart, however, is her academic background in art history, extensive international travel, and more than 20 years working within the Australian, Asian, and international art markets. In this episode, we explore artwork from many different angles. We discuss what art actually is and the differences between personal artistic value versus the more commercial aspect of the art world. We explore the many ways people produce, share, and sell art, and with technology advances, the democratisation of art, and the challenges with buying art online. We also consider the question, is art a good investment? So if you're interested in learning about the art of investing in art, you will enjoy this episode of the Rich with Purpose podcast. Welcome to the Rich with Purpose podcast, Catherine Asquith.
Hello, nice to be here.
Catherine, this is a very different type of finance topic that we're talking about. We do explore and have some great guests on from all sorts of backgrounds, as our listeners would know. But today we're going to be talking about art. And art is considered an investment by some people, but it's probably not the first thing that comes to mind. So, I'm really interested in digging a bit deeper and understanding a bit of background about art. And, I'm going to learn lots from this chat. So, yeah, really looking forward to it.
Okay, great.
But before we get into all the nuances and details about art, can you first just give me a bit of background? How did you get into the world of art and buying and selling art, which is kind of what your business is?
Well, look, I think I was probably destined to end up here, to be honest. Looking back now with the benefit of hindsight, I grew up with art. My great aunt was a big collector. We lived with art in our homes, in my family. And I think really I fell in love with art history when I was at school. So it was a natural progression for me then to undertake some art history units in my undergrad degree, and I majored in art history. I did a couple of more degrees within the arts. And to complement that at the time, I thought, well, I better go over to Europe and look at all the major museums and consider all the major masterpieces that I was studying in art history. And it was really a modern day grand tour in the tradition of the 18th century that I undertook. So I went to all the major museums and art galleries across Europe. And it was really just a nice finish to what I think my parents wanted me to have, which was what they termed a well-rounded education. I'm very grateful that I had that. But I think really the catalyst for me making any sort of formal moves into this area was my first trip to New York, which was in the 90s. And I was very lucky to be chaperoned around the major commercial galleries in Manhattan by an art collector. So I ended up having entree to all sorts of interesting stock rooms in the backs of these centuries-old galleries, and got to meet some extraordinary collectors, a couple of really strange characters along the way.
I bet.
And it was just a really compelling experience. And I think that really cemented my need. It was a need. I just thought, I want to be part of this. I need to be part of this energy, this vibrancy, if you like, and from what I could observe as a career. And it stayed with me when I returned to Melbourne. And at the time, I was working in the corporate sector, and which just really didn't suit me at all. And I thought, well, I've got to start making some moves towards this. And I just started exploring ideas of how to move into it in a more formal way. And I drew upon that all-encompassing term consultant. So I became an art consultant for a few years, which really just means you end up doing all manner of projects and jobs. And eventually I opened my gallery, a commercial art gallery here in Melbourne, ran that successfully for about just over 10 years. And it was towards the latter part of the career of the gallery that I decided I needed to stretch my wings and go back to, think more about my career path in terms of, sustainability. And I was feeling a bit claustrophobic in Australia, to be perfectly honest. And I wanted to explore the global art scene. And the only way to do that is to immerse yourself in it. So what I ended up doing is I closed the gallery and really sort of followed the international art fairs over a couple of years. And of course, during that time, you meet up with other art dealers, consultants, advisors, and, I developed a nice network and some contacts. And now I'm back in Melbourne, and my role is as an art advisor, which really fundamentally means I just advise a private and corporate clientele on their collections or starting a collection.
Okay, that's great background, and obviously a lot of history there, Catherine. It does, when you were talking about, traveling in Europe, it does remind me of the days when, I'm no art buff by any means. I've got no idea when it comes to art, but, backpacking around Europe and then traveling with my wife before we had children, we visited all the main galleries and, did all the stuff you're meant to do. And, I think that did definitely increase our appreciation of art in terms of we're more interested in it, whether we really know what we're looking at. And we do go to the NGV and start introducing the kids to it now. And that's it will be interesting to get your thoughts on it and learn from the chat we're having today. So, Catherine, I guess one thing that I like to do is go back to basics, and we can start talking about specific artworks and how do you buy and sell art, and art as an investment, I guess, which does link back to this podcast, which is about money. But really, the podcast is more about purpose and linking our money to our purpose. So, I guess one of the first big questions I have is, in your experience, why do people buy art? Like, what is the attraction to it?
That's a really big question. It's a really interesting but complex question. People have been discussing this, ruminating over it for centuries. Philosophers, writers have been considering, why do people buy art? What attracts them to it? Exactly as you've said. And we can actually probably go back to even, a 13th century example in Florence of the Medici family, who were, as you'd know, very successful merchant bankers. And they were also great benefactors and supporters of the arts. And it wasn't an altruistic reason at all. It was they could see that their position, their status within society was enhanced greatly by supporting various artists with the commissioning of works, marbles, statuary, paintings and murals. And in fact, in some ways, they demonstrated the first examples of public art. So that's sort of the historical legacy of why that's one of the reasons why people buy art.
Does that come from, is that the Uffizi Gallery in Florence that
a lot of the Medici collection ended up there.
Yeah. I do remember seeing that in Florence.
Yeah, which is a very important aspect of the Western art history. That's how we have these collections from benefactors.
Yeah. So just to dig into that a little bit. So the reason that this wealthy investment banking, merchant banking family, in a era, I suppose, where there was a lot of wealth and in society, what you're saying is that for the Medici family anyway, commissioning art and assisting artists who maybe were artists always struggling back then, I guess, is part of that question.
Look, some, I mean, that's a huge question, but some were, some weren't. Some were, very comfortable. It was to do with who was the patron of an artist at the time. And, some of the more well-known artists from that period of history, the early Renaissance through to the latter part of the Renaissance, so the Quattrocento period, the artists that we know of and the works that we see in all the major museums, they were very successful, but not all.
Sure.
But
so the Medici family, they did it to make money or to increase their status, or to...
I think it was. I think there were two things. I think they had an interest in beautifying their town, their city, Florence. I think that was genuine, but also it was definitely to do with status. They were very open. I'm not an expert on the Medici, so I don't want people writing in saying you're incorrect. By no means. I'm certainly not an expert. But, this was about status building, about maintaining a position, a very lauded position in society. So I think, there was definitely an interest, clearly. They could see the benefits of it to them and their family.
And I mean, that makes sense. I mean, we see it today, that I'm sure a lot of wealthy people that get into art, it's, there is, I guess, an interest in terms of we like art, but surely if I'm networking in the right networks, I suppose, or with the right people, it increases my status, it makes me appear a certain way, and therefore I should get into this art stuff because it can probably help me in business and connections and that sort of stuff, I guess.
Well, you're absolutely right. That is certainly one motivating reason for certain collectors. And there's a whole raft of different types of collectors. And I guess, in answering that question, why do people art, I'm happy to sort of disclose my experience and going back to, what compelled me to buy my first artwork. And I was a student. I wasn't earning much. I took myself off to the first art fair that I'd gone to here in Melbourne, which was probably back in 1996. I came across a work. I was really intrigued by it. Visually, it just drew me in. I asked the director of the gallery in the booth at the time, I said, can you tell me more about this work? And I was really intrigued by what had gone into it and who the artist was. The artist was a former mathematician. He had an interest in the ocean and the tides and timing, and it just really connected. So that's that sort of backstory, or what we call the narrative, just really, I had a response of an aha moment, like, oh, that's really interesting. And I had to buy it. I had to have it. I just thought, I need to have this work in me, in my little funny flat at the time. And thankfully the director was delightful, and I said to her, can I have lay-by? And of course, which you'd never really say back in those days, but I don't know whether she took pity on me, but she was very gracious. And the director of the gallery was very gracious, and she was able to accommodate a 6-month lay-by for me, which was, a very gracious thing of her to do. So, but it's also, that experience has stayed with me since then. And it's actually something that I relay to people who and to my clients are a little bit tentative about buying work, and they'll say, how do I, Catherine, how should I approach buying art, and what are some of the guidelines? And I sort of say, look, forget about all of what you read, just go with your gut instinct. I've always believed an artwork needs to sort of jump out and grab you by the throat. Metaphorically, you've got to have some physical or emotional response to a work. Otherwise, there's a possibility that you'll buy a work, hang it on your wall, and you'll just pass it in a few months, in a few years' time. It'll be nothing but wallpaper. So I say to clients, go with your gut instinct. What does, it's got to say something to you. You have to have some sort of reaction and response to it. And I do that as sort of a precaution, so that it means that it'll allow for the work to be an enduring piece. So you want to be able to continue to look at that work day in, day out for, many years to come. And I've proven the practice to myself. When I've bought with my heart, and my eyes, and the work stays with me, and that's that. So that initial foray into buying art as a young student, there was no salesmanship. She didn't try and sell the work to me. I just responded. So it was very intuitive. But not everyone's going to have that response, as you mentioned. People are motivated by different things.
And I guess that's interesting, isn't it? When you think about, if you are looking at buying art in the first place, then it may be for status or making money or as an investment, or it may be for the reason that probably why art exists, which is to appreciate it and connect with it, or, like it. So yeah, that's interesting to make that distinction.
Yes.
Particularly for anyone that might be thinking about it. And I guess, there's that concept of what is art. I mean, I'm sort of thinking, when does a picture become art? We've got 2 young kids, so they're coming back with bits of paper with scrawl on it, every day virtually. And, you sort of, you don't think about it too deeply, but, there's that idea of, is art a pretty picture, or is there the story behind it, or is there, the connection that you make, or how it makes you feel, or, I don't know, when does something actually become art versus a picture? And I guess there's even the concept of prints versus originals. And, if a print looks the same as the original, then, do you get the same?
Okay, so I really have to reprimand you on that.
All right.
Because there's a really a misunderstanding out there, if you like, about prints.
Yep.
And originals. There are limited edition prints which are printed to a particular edition. So you might have an edition of, say, 20 or 100 or 2,000. They are still original artworks.
Right.
When people talk about prints, which has become the term used to describe posters.
Yes.
And posters are a whole different thing. Just, posters highlighting, the Louvre current exhibition, the NGV's current exhibition. They're posters. They're limited edition prints can be quite valuable on the secondary market. So they do have a value. And this is something that, I'm constantly at pains to try and explain to people. For many new collectors, the only way to start and develop a collection, and this is a financial restriction, is to commence with low editioned prints by well-established artists. So if you wanted, you could potentially acquire a limited edition work by Andy Warhol for, I don't know, 1/50th of the value of, say, a painting. But it would still have value because it can be traded on the secondary market.
So we get it. So we're kind of getting into the investment or the financial element, which is part of, scarcity and supply and that sort of thing. And is there, I mean, is there, I don't know, this might be sacrilege saying something like this, I don't know, but again, I'm doing it from a completely ignorant perspective, so forgive me. But you know, if you have these prints or or posters or whatever, then or an original artwork versus a limited edition print versus a poster, then from an artistic perspective, you know, how would you?
All right. So if I go back, let's go back to your question about, you know, when does a picture become art? It's all about context. And when we use the term context in the art world, it's about, you know, has it been exhibited? That's a context. Has it been produced by a documented artist, meaning an artist who is represented by a gallery or has been represented by a gallery or is deceased? And has, you know, the estate of that artist is being represented by a gallery, is the artist in a museum. All of those factors contribute to the context of the artwork. Now, just as an aside, and this is a whole other conversation, there are many very talented people out there who will be practicing as artists in their own right, but will never be able to be recognised by the market because they can't get a gallery to represent them, they can't get their work out there in the market, no one wants to buy it, and so on. There's all sorts of reasons for that. There's always more artists than there are galleries. And traditionally, for an artwork to have value, that context, that testing on the market, which happens in both the primary and the secondary market, that's what gives the value.
The financial value.
Yes, it's the financial value, but it's also got what we call a curatorial value.
Yes.
Which means, you know, a museum will be looking at acquiring that work. That gives value. So if I can let me give you just one example, and I'll take you just hopefully quickly through, you know, the trajectory of the artwork from the artist studio through to the museum. So an artist is being represented by a commercial gallery that's well established and well regarded. They put together a show, the show goes on, half the works sell, which is a good result. And some of those acquisitions, some of those sold artworks have gone to a museum, which is a very good endorsement. It's like an endorsement. Well done. You've been acquired by a museum. Clearly, museums can't acquire every single artwork out there on the market. And a couple of other collectors, private collectors, have picked up the works. They hold on to the works for 10 years, maybe 15. And for a number of reasons, death, divorce, debt, they need to offload one of that work. So they'll invariably take it to auction. Because the artist has continued with their career and gradually over the years developed more and more of a high profile, it's meant when that work's gone to auction, there's a ready market, a ready buyers to buy. They buy at a good price, say it's on par with retail. And so that endorsement by the market, all of that has provided context to the value of the work by both markets. It's also to do with who was the private collector. Was the private collector, a person of note? You know, an ex-politician, a well-known statesperson, a well-known collector, like, say, the Fairfax collection or so all of that goes into what's known as provenance.
Right.
And that's what gives, where was the work? It's like the pedigree of an artwork.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's what gives it its value. Just as that artwork may well have been an editioned print from, say, a small edition of, say, only 15. But because of the development of that artist's profile on the primary market and then moves through to the secondary market, which is the auctions, endorsement by a museum, it's come from a great collection, the artist is continuing and their practice is ongoing, it's consistent, it's dedicated, all of those factors add to the value. And then, of course, who's bought it?
Mm.
And then beyond that is who was the gallery, because that matters too. I mean, we've got to a point now, this is perhaps more globally, but I mean, it happens in Australia. Collectors will just drop the name of a gallery saying, well, I bought it from Gagosian. And that has an immediate endorsement. It's like the difference between, just a more commercial example, buying from David Jones as compared to buying from Kmart.
Right.
There's a status now attached. And people will be who are buying art on a fairly regular basis will know things like that, or they'll ask an art advisor about things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we'll dig a bit deeper into what makes art valuable and art an investment, which is, I think, where we're sort of heading. But it is interesting, isn't it, that I guess if you're a purist, or maybe the way that you purchase that piece of art when you're a student, it's very different to what you just talked about with provenance and all that stuff. If you're a purist, like, who cares who else bought it? Like, why does it matter if a rich person bought this picture? What matters is your personal connection to something that you find beautiful or moving or whatever. And I'm not an artist, so again, when I say, as I'm guessing, as a purist, as an artist, may feel like that all that stuff is just commercial, and I don't know. Is that?
There's definitely artists who couldn't care less about that. In fact, it's almost anathema to their entire being. There are artists who really shy away from that commercial side, and indeed these days there are many artists who will not choose to be represented by a gallery. They'll choose the Instagram way and decide to sell their work like that. And so the whole nature of collecting and buying art has changed with all these advances in technology, and the fact that you can now buy artworks online. There's online auctions, there's online exhibitions, there's online art fairs. We can all buy artworks from the comfort of our own home, our own Learjet, our own car. I mean, it's for many, for certain commentators, they would say this is the democratisation of the art world. No longer is it an elite habit of only the rich and wealthy.
Although, would you say that if you're looking at stuff online, it's hard to, really appreciate an artwork? So the other day we bought a rug, and we bought it online, and it looked great on the Instagram pictures, and it looked great online and all that sort of stuff. But when it did come home, it just didn't fit, and it didn't have the same impact, or it didn't feel like it was going to fit our home. So, they were able to take it back by courier and get a refund and all that sort of stuff. So that was fine. But is it similar? Can it be similar with art if you're buying it online? I mean, can you make that same connection like you did when you were a university student and being struck by this artwork? And if you're buying online, is it more about provenance? Hopefully I'm saying that right. Is it more about provenance and how it is on paper, as opposed to how it makes you feel when you look at it?
Well, that's actually a really pertinent question. I think what a number of commentators would say regarding, the behaviour of collectors buying, the digital acquisition, shall we say. There's, just as an aside, there's a fantastic report that comes out each year that's undertaken by a very clever economist, Dr. Claire McAndrews, who looks at the art market. It's part of the UBS art report, and looks at the art market. And there's a section on, collector behaviour, buying online. And what, I can extrapolate from those reports is that most people who are buying online have either seen the artwork before, or the artist's work before, know the gallery, or have enough confidence to buy it. But alongside that it's not as always just simply, click and buy. They may have had a conversation with the gallerist. They've rung them up saying, can you tell me about the work? Now, galleries, notwithstanding we're in lockdown just at the moment, but, galleries will do FaceTime with you. I've done it when I couldn't get into an auction house. I've said, take me around the artwork and they'll do it. So I trust myself enough to make a decision on that. But yes, the paperwork is really important. I need to, be assured of provenance, condition report, and so on. When you're buying from a gallery, you're buying on the reputation of the gallery and the reputation of the artist. And I would say 9 times out of 10, if you were to buy an artwork from a gallery and you get it home and you're not happy, they're probably going to, either exchange it or give you a credit note. Most galleries would not be happy knowing that someone's not happy with their purchase.
Yeah, right.
But
That's
alongside
their reputation and everything.
Yeah, exactly. And most gallerists, part of their role is to enthuse a new audience and enthuse collectors to, come in and look at the work and to buy art. I've had experiences where I've seen things online thinking, okay, that looks kind of interesting. And I'm looking at purely from composition. What is this aesthetic, colour, palette, composition telling me? And then I've gone into the gallery and I thought, oh, that's a bit disappointing. And that can happen. And some artworks are really difficult to photograph. And lots of artists will say, oh, it's really difficult to photograph. We've got some great photographers out there in the art world who know how to photograph works. And it depends on how much touch-up they do after, in the post-production process too.
Oh, of the photo, yeah, of course. Yeah.
They need to sell the work. It's got to be presented in literally the best light. But I think fundamentally people who acquire art simply via the internet, they've developed enough self-confidence. They're assured of their decisions and their choices, and so they feel comfortable enough to do it.
And so would those people even look at the artists that don't go to galleries and, those artists that you said they don't bother with that? Or are those artists just happy for people to buy their stuff because they like it?
I think all artists want to know that someone likes their work, appreciates it enough to, put down 2, 5, 50,000. I think all artists fundamentally want to know that. That's an endorsement of their years of art practice, whether they've been practicing for 10 or 20 years. That's an endorsement, that's an accolade, and they need it. They really do. They need to have red dots on their exhibitions, and their works at exhibitions. But as far as artists who are choosing different ways to develop their art practice, and let's just talk about, the Instagram artists, I think that's, it's a very savvy, very shrewd strategy to promote your artwork. And I think there's also something to be said for some artists are not going to fit into the traditional artist-gallery relationship either. Having been a former gallerist myself, there were some artists who would, approach me and they wanted to be represented by me. And I used to think they're not going to fit into the system, and it's just not going to work. It's a very unusual relationship between artist and gallery. It's like this marriage without the sex. I mean, it's you're looking after each other. Artists really come to rely on trusting their gallerist, and the gallerist has a huge responsibility to support and develop and promote the career of the artist. So it is an unusual professional relationship, but some artists are never going to work in that.
Yeah, you can see how that would happen. And we used to live in East Melbourne for a little while, so we'd be over at Smith Street in Fitzroy and, go past galleries here and there. And One of my good friends runs a gallery down on Johnson Street. I'll give her a shout out, Sheeny, who runs Off the Curb down on Johnson Street in Fitzroy, Collingwood, I think. So I've been to a couple of her exhibitions, a few over the years, and you just wonder how that connection happens between the gallerist and the artists, because gallerists may be artists, but they are probably not, and it's kind of connecting artists to artist lovers, I suppose.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, I mean, we have talked a little bit about what makes art valuable. I think you've touched on that, and probably what I've learned is it's super complex, and there's so many different facets and element that goes into the financial value of art, and probably there is a difference between love, the personal value of art as opposed to the financial value of art, and they could potentially be totally opposed. But they can also be similar. I mean, I do wonder sometimes. I do look at some art that are in galleries sometimes, and I just go that. And again, forgive me because I'm not an art lover, but I think, how the hell is that in this gallery? It looks terrible. Like it's but it's got a huge amount of value.
And that's the thing. There's also, I remember speaking with someone very early on in my career and wandering around galleries, and they said, Catherine, I really don't like any of this work. I mean, should I? And I said, no, that's the best thing about the art world. There are no rules. I mean, there are, but there aren't. And you don't have to like everything. I mean, I have a very broad appreciation of the art world, of the markets, of a range of genres, from painting, portraiture, sculpture, photography, and so on. And I have to, otherwise how do I do my job and advise my clients? But, does it mean that I would buy everything? No.
Personally, you mean?
No, exactly. But for myself. And that's the other thing too, which is what is interesting about private collections. They are reflections of who you are, where you've been, who you are at the moment, and where you're going. And that's why we have this fascination. And that's why they're, with private collections, say, Elizabeth Taylor's collection. I mean, it's about her. We've had, there was the Reg Grundy, Reg Grundy, former TV executive, Grundy TV, several years ago now. And that collection went to auction. And there was, a great marketing strategy and campaign around that, because it was a very interesting collection. It had been beautifully curated over the years. There was an advisor on board. And the fascination also, though, is, who was this person? And, again, from a personal experience, I'm happy to disclose that, what I bought 10 years ago is quite different to what I would buy and what I buy now. And that's because I'm a different person. And there is also that, going back to, the different types of collectors and what motivates them, it is about, it is personal taste. And it's to do with the person. Some collectors, as you say, purely investment driven, financially driven. That's all they're interested in. And they'll either be short-term speculators and flip the work in 6 months, or they'll be long-term investors who I think have an appreciation of the art, but they'll hold on to it for 10, 15 years, but they'll always be looking at, an investment potential. Then there are other people that will buy purely out of a love of art. And I
guess if you do that, there's the risk that you pay too much for something and then you've just bought it because you love it, but it's actually not financially worth much.
And that can happen. I've had, unfortunately, some collectors come to me, they paid too much. And they said, but, I was told it would accumulate in value over the years and so on. And I've had to give them a really hard, cold truth. I'm sorry, the market hasn't supported this work or this artist. It is not worth anywhere near what you paid for 20 years ago.
And would it have been an okay purchase at the time. It's just
Yes.
the market's changed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's the other tricky side of investing in the art market. There are definitely pundits out there who will proclaim to know the formula for investing in art, and to an extent, you can use some factors to guide you in those acquisitions, and it's based on auction records and other sort of databases and that type of information. But just as the share market is driven by people and emotions, so too is the art market.
Mm, mm. So that's a great segue. So is art a good investment, Catherine?
I'd have to say yes. And that's not a mercenary response.
Yeah.
That is, I think, we as a society, we need to invest in art, because when we're doing that, we're investing in our cultural infrastructure. Without art, we would be a very barefoot society. And art provides so much for so many people. As you say, you're taking your young children to the NGV now. I mean, if you're doing that for entertainment or to keep them quiet for a few hours or simply just to have an outing, it doesn't really matter. The fact is you're actually going out and looking at art. If we don't do that, we will not have museums. We will not have arts writers, curators. People will lose jobs. And
so you're talking about the social element of investing in the arts, which that makes sense. And using that example of taking the kids to the NGV, we wouldn't be able to do that if we didn't have art. So that makes total sense. What about art as a specific investment, for individuals or families that have collections or want to be buying art? Is it a good investment? And how do you do it in a way to make it a good investment? If you're, let's say that you're not as into buying art for the love of it or really connecting with it or whatever, and if you're clinically looking at it as a investment,
which is perfectly fine, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with being focused on developing an art collection for investment potential, because I mean, really, to be sensible about it, I really think, if you're purchasing anything over 5,000, you do want to have some sense of, how serious is this artist? How good is this gallery? Are they going to be around, in the long term? Because that will affect the representation of the artist. I mean, just as an aside, unfortunately, galleries close, artists are left without a gallery, and a percentage of them will never get representation again. So that's a factor. But just going back to, investment potential, I think, after 5,000, 10,000, you need to know that this will have some value down the track. And the way to set up some guidelines and develop a strategy around that is you need to know the market really well. And you need to have studied it. And I would strongly advise people who have that intention to at least consult an art advisor at the outset to give you some strategies and define the parameters of your collection so that it will have value. But along the way, and a lot of people are not aware of this and it's not openly discussed at all, you can actually monetize your collection. There are ways to enhance its value while it's still together. So while it's still consolidated. And people aren't aware of this necessarily, even people who have been collecting work for, 20 years. Again, that's to do with get an art advisor on board who can provide you with a couple of strategies.
To make it more valuable.
Indeed. And
right.
one of the things that can really add value to a collection is to loan out some of the key artworks to museums for curated shows. That's going back to provenance. So if you can say that your Arthur Boyd work or Sidney Nolan work was included in a survey show at the NGA in Canberra, when when it comes to being auctioned off or sold off in 20 years' time, if that was a standout survey show and it's part of a very good quality collection, that provenance, that loan, will have increased the provenance and given it more value, and the market will recognise that.
Of the individual artwork.
Yes.
And does that provenance also translate into the collection?
Yes. Yeah. And that's the other thing. I mean,
it sounds like there's a lot of this value by association.
Absolutely. That's what it is. I mean, we don't talk about that. But we use terms like provenance.
Yes.
But that is what it is. And it's, you want to be in good company. When a good art advisor will be very truthful and honest with that new collector and say, you need to get rid of that, and that work, because that's detracting from the overall value of your collection. So either you get rid of it or you send it down to the beach house, because it'll detract from the value. When I've looked at collections that have gone to auction, you'll go through and you'll think, okay, right, that's good. I can see, what they were aiming for in terms of, the curatorial premise behind the collection. And then up comes 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 horrible works, just disasters. And you think, now what happened there? Did they just go on a spending spree? Did they get the wrong advice? And again, I have to, tout the value of an art advisor. They should be independent. They should not be aligned to any auction house or gallery. They should know the market really well. And that way they can provide impartial, solid advice. But also I'd always say, and I think any advisor, financial or otherwise, is going to have a disclaimer. There are no guarantees either.
And it sounds like when you're talking about, art advisors being independent and not being aligned or tied with galleries, it just reminded me of our industry, the issues we've had with advisors that work for banks or large institutions or product providers or getting kickbacks and, whatever. It's interesting. That independence is critical, right? And you want your advisor to be working for you. That's
exactly.
It's common. It makes it's logical when you say it, but
yeah. I mean, it's like also, I can just give you, just talking about being impartial. I mean, I was invited to be a judge of an art show recently, and I was aware of a number of artists who were in the show. So I thought, how am I going to approach this and do a good job? Because it really matters to me, my integrity, when I'm, been invited to do something like that. So I decided to judge the show blind. I didn't look at the catalogue, so I had no names attached to it. And I thought, all right, I'm just going to respond to the works, which was a great exercise for me. I thought, all right, how good is my eye? But also, I think that process really resonated and meant all the more for the winning artists.
Does that mean that provenance wasn't part of that judging?
No, it wasn't. I mean, I didn't look. I didn't look at the artists' names or anything. All I did was I walked around. Literally, I had to look at the works in situ, and I just looked at and responded to the works. And I mean, as it turned out, the artists that I ended up selecting were all established and, I'd say very, very good artists. But it was a good exercise. Yeah, wow. And I mean, I think, there's politics in all industries. There would be politics in your industry, and there'd be people wanting you to do favours and, and I don't get courted a lot. At all. I wouldn't say that. That might be to do with me. I don't know. but I really try to, if a client has consulted me and they want my advice, that's what they're going to get, independent of any of my friendships. And I have friendships with gallerists and auctioneers. It's the client comes first.
Yeah, well, I mean, from my perspective, if you don't get courted a lot, you're either no good or you're very impartial and I've had a similar experience, that as a financial advisor, you don't get approached too often with, offers of anything, because people just know that there's no point talking to this guy or this girl. So, that's a positive if you're if you're an advisor looking after your client's interests first, I guess. So,
yeah.
No, that's really interesting. So, in terms of art as an investment, then, when we think about investing, a lot of it's to do with risk management. As an art advisor, how do you think about managing risk when it comes to buying art?
Okay, so that's a really valid point and issue to raise. Part of what I'll do, particularly, for example, on the secondary market, when we're looking at 6 and 7 figure artworks, is I undertake a due diligence report, which considers the provenance, the market traction of that artist and or that artwork, what the estimate is, and therefore I can always work out what the reserve is. Is that valid? Is it appropriate at this time? Does it match auction records? And very importantly, I check the condition of the work as well. Now, I'm not a conservator, so if there was an issue that I didn't understand, I would pull in a conservator.
A conservator being someone who does what?
Who they repair artworks.
Oh, okay. So for the condition, the quality of the physical.
So I just look at, the visual condition, like is the canvas still taut? Is the frame in good condition? Is the surface of the painting, clean, not chipped, not fracturing or crackling, those sorts of things. So all of that is part of my due diligence. And that plus I then make a recommendation to the client. Ultimately, the client has to make a decision about the investment. I just set out, here are the facts.
Right.
I've got professional indemnity insurance. And I think, most people have, but I think you want to be very mindful of, if a client asks straight out, should I invest? I'll give them the whole picture. And I think, there are many times where I will undertake a due diligence report for an artwork and the auction house has just got it wrong. Now, they haven't got it wrong on purpose. I'd say it's just a bit lazy or they've forgotten it, but they also just rely on what documentation is given to them when the artwork is consigned to them. So they're relying on the vendor to an extent, unless they've done research. So I want to be very clear about that. It's not, there's nothing surreptitious or about. So that you look at that, you can look at the trajectory of value and what the auctions prices have done, but you also need to, I think, look at what else is happening in the broader economy, as well. And if to look at the infrastructure of that city that you're living in and what's happening, because they are tied together, the share market and the art market. There is a connection of a sort as well.
So is there, does art go through cycles then as well with,
yes,
I guess like shares or property, or, does it have its own cycles, and are those cycles tied with what's, how much money people have, and are there, can you buy low and sell high and all this sort of stuff in art as well?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Definitely there are cycles. It's also contingent with who are the new collectors that have come in. What are they now buying? Because when I use the term big collectors, I mean, very wealthy collectors who are buying really at the top end, blue chip works, we call them. So they're the multi-million-dollar works. And, as a good advisor, you need to know what's happening there, because all of that translates back down to sort of the lower levels, if you like, which we still can be talking about 100 to 300,000, $500,000. So you need to be aware of what's happening and what is happening out there in the art market, who's buying what. Because also what's happening is a lot of new young 30-something collectors are coming to the fore. That's the new demographic. It's very strong in the market. A lot of those younger collectors are coming from Southeast Asia.
Right.
They're very moneyed, and they're very active on the secondary market, which is why, and that accounts for why the auctions in the Southeast Asia region are so buoyed up at the moment and have such strong results.
Are they driven by different things as well?
Yes.
Different collectors and different types of collectors?
Yeah, I mean, for many years, decades really, the strongest genre, shall we say, or category, that's the term used in auctions, but the strongest category was Impressionism. And that always sold. That was the choice of any serious collector for many years. But the world's changed and new markets have opened up. And the Southeast Asian market is now hitting 20 years of strength, great strength, because it's really supported by the inhabitants of that region as well as, big collectors from other markets such as, New York and London and Europe. And also there's, within Asia, the broader Asia and throughout China, there's a lot of new private museums that have gone up and are on display. And that goes back to, our initial point, or your initial points about, status and showing, and this is my lifestyle, this is what I'm worth, this is my value, and here's my private museum. So that, that is also a factor in why there's great strength in the Southeast Asian markets.
There's also different types of art, and Catherine, you presumably work in more traditional artworks like paintings, and I don't know if you get into sculptures and that's what you do as well. So sure. Paintings and sculptures, but I don't know, some would argue that is, do you look at things like, as a collector, there are collectors that collect sports memorabilia, for example, or basketball cards, for example. And now we're getting into, with this, crypto and digital world, we're getting into things like what they called NFTs. And we did a podcast episode about crypto currency and Bitcoin, etc., a few episodes ago. But we didn't get into NFTs in detail, non-fungible tokens, which are effectively pictures that people are paying millions and millions of dollars for as art, but they're pictures on the computer. So, I mean, is that just a reflection of different micro markets within the art world, or as an art advisor, do you kind of look at that stuff and say it's all a bit crazy, or it's...
Well, firstly, I'm going to be very honest and say I just don't get it. I know I'm meant to, and within my circle of colleagues, we're all sort of trying to get our head around it and discuss it.
I think everyone is, to be honest.
And it's, it's very funky, it's new, it's all technologically based. It's clearly coming from a particular demographic. Some of the comments coming from that demographic have been about it's going to democratise art. So that's not just for the elite, but the reality is the elite have bought the $69 million or $690-something million NFT. So that
that's right.
loses water, that argument. Yeah. Look, I'm a purist, and a lot of my colleagues are.
So let's put NFTs aside. But as a purist, do you also look at other things that people collect, collectibles, antiques? I know you may not specialise in it, but do you see those as different forms of art as well?
I wouldn't say I'd see them necessarily as different forms of art, but I would see that they all have a common denominator. As a collector. Collectors are interesting people. They're driven. They're compelled to do something. They're compelled to acquire. It's like a disease. It's a good disease, but that's what it is. There are people that collect luxury cars. and sports memorabilia. I valued an art collection, I think, 2 years ago, and it was over 1,000 artworks from, and artworks meaning anything from, crumpled up pieces of paper from artists who were Vietnamese soldiers, so during the war.
Right, wow.
So it was war memorabilia, but it was also, they were artworks in their own right. Now, that's a really niche, small market, and there are other collectors, and this collector was obsessive, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying that. It was just an absolute passion. And I'm about to value another very large collection of ceramics. So I think what is aligned throughout all of these collections is the collector behaviour, and it's interesting. I mean, it's what makes us human. It's an interesting position in our society to have so many different types of collectors.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one thing that's really nice is to see the success, I think, in Aboriginal artwork or Indigenous artwork, which, I understand they probably struggled a long time for producing some beautiful stuff, but it's probably much more mainstream in the art world now, and a lot of value there as well, which is great. Yeah,
it's definitely. I think there's a resurgence of interest in that, and there's all sorts of reasons for that. That's a very complex part of the market because of the multi-layered history and culture within the Australian Indigenous community. But that's had a sort of an ebb and flow. But it's definitely on the rise at the moment, and it's we've just had the Archibald. Well, we've got the Archibald on at the moment, and there's so many Indigenous artists who are finalists in that as well. So yes, that's it's much more in front of the wider public now, which I think is only a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, but as you said, it is a different type of art market, and from what you're saying, I guess it's becoming clearer to me that there's so many different subsets of the art market, and it's critical to understand those. And it's not as simple as just buying something and it goes up or anything like that. But like with any investment, it's understanding, how it works, what's behind it, the nuances of the different specific markets themselves or sub-markets, and understanding that. So that's, we've been chatting for ages, Catherine, and it's been really interesting. I think it's a great place to finish in terms of, just touching on the different, other elements of art. I'm sure we could talk for many more hours, and, look forward to another chat sometime. But one of the things that we always come back to, because and the reason why I wanted to talk about art was it's not a traditional investment, but it is something that a lot of people look at. But importantly, it's actually something that a lot of people are really passionate about. And that comes back to the things that are important in our own lives, and being driven by our own purpose and the things that we love, and connecting that back to money. And so that's why this discussion about art is important, because if art is something that you're passionate about, then how that connects back to your money is also important, which are the sort of conversations that we have with our clients. So the other thing we know is that our purposes can be different, and everyone has different values and a different purpose, and it can also change over time. And even as you said, as an art lover, that's changed, from over the years as well. So, I'm interested, Catherine, based on, where you are now in your journey, how do you define your purpose right now?
Fundamentally, I think for me, I want to wake up every day with a passion for that day. And art gets me up in the morning. It just, the possibility of looking at more good art or bad art, but that's what motivates me every day. Life's short, and there's a hell of a lot of art out there to still see, and just as an aside, I've got a new accountant. They asked me, how long do you expect to continue to work, and do we need to start thinking about retirement? And I said, no one retires in the art world. You stay. This goes on forever.
Yeah.
I expect, so long as my brain's good, to be working until I really can't work anymore. And that's why I got into it. It is my passion, and it's my life. And I thoroughly enjoy it. And as I said, life's short, so
Fantastic.
Enjoy it.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing, Catherine. And yeah, on that retirement point, we have that conversation with clients all the time. We believe that we have to define what retirement is for us. There's no such thing as this preconceived concept of retirement, which is society's kind of automatic box to put people in. And anyone that's interested in listening to retirement, you might want to listen back to the episode we had with Barry LaValle, which is an episode where we talked all about retirement. And how we need to define it for ourselves. So, but that's great, Catherine. You look forward to seeing everything that you're going to be doing for many years. And anyone that is interested in exploring art as an investment, anyone that has collections, has works of art that may want to have them valued, may want to see how they can increase the value, or just talk to someone who knows a thing or two about art, as you can see from this chat. We'll put Catherine's details in the show notes, so feel free to reach out to her for that. Definitely don't call me if you want to know anything about art. But on that note, Catherine, it's been great to chat, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks for coming on the Rich with Purpose podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Great. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Our aim is to share the knowledge with as many people as possible, so please share it with everyone you know. And if you're enjoying the show, please subscribe and visit our website, richwithpurpose.com.au, to get access to all our free resources. See you next time.